So, as we all know, Trent has completed his move to Real Madrid. And the reason I'm shooting this video is I initially thought that this is something very clear. Everyone knows about this. Trent is going to play at Madrid and is going to be another brilliant creative force into an attack that is already quite brilliant in itself. What I am seeing though on YouTube, on these various podcasts, and all these people, these fans, these so called football analysts, and all, what I'm seeing is none of them, or very few of them, are actually doing a good job. Very few of them. And most of them out there with their generic analysis and just no knowledge or no awareness about the context is actually pretty disappointing. And this is why I've actually came up with this video. Now you can see the very short index of this video. We are going to see the different ways of using Trent. So the first basic way that everyone remembers is the Klopp way, how he broke through under Klopp, and then how he played under Klopp. So his role and his function as a right back under the Jurgen Klopp Liverpool for majority of the Klopp era. Then we are going to look at the way Slot used him, which was completely different to how Klopp used him in these years that I've mentioned there, pretty much from 2017 to 2022, roughly. And then it's the third way, which pretty much explains itself, which is the Frimpong and Alonso way, which basically means how Frimpong was deployed as a wing back in a back three or a back five system. Now that explains itself, but still we'll get on to that. The two important ways to look how Trent has been used, which actually gives us a reference to how he can be used or how he should be used, is the Klopp way from 2017 to 2022, and is the Slot way, which is pretty much last season or the season that just ended. Now let's get on to the Klopp way. So this was pretty much the Liverpool team under Klopp. This was most of the time how we saw Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp. Now, surprisingly, I think this is the same team that started only once in the Champions League final, and this has this famous joke that no one actually realizes. Everyone thinks they played together so many times, but they did not. But this was pretty much the shape and the structure of the Klopp team during that 2017 to 2022 era. Trent's role in this was a very direct, cross-oriented fullback. Now, he was a bombarding fullback, not in the same way that Malo Gusto is at Chelsea or Frimpong was at Leverkusen, in a different way, but he was very bombarding. It was pretty simple. Firmino used to drop deep, creating a link between the midfield or defense and the attack. Salah used to make these inside runs, as we all know, along with Mane. And that used to create the space for Robertson and Trent to get in these positions and then deliver the balls. So everyone is aware of this. I'm actually surprised because a lot of people who think they are actually aren't. And this was how the space was created for Trent, for him to enter into those spaces and then deliver the crosses. So his role from 2017 to 21 or 22 was a very direct, attack-minded, bombarding fullback that used to take the space up, which was left by Salah, who was making those inside runs, and then getting in positions where potentially he can cross the ball in. And it was a very direct way of approaching the game, which Klopp created because Trent back then was quite young. So a more complicated role, a role with more rotations, was slightly harder for him to understand, which is pretty normal for any young player. So he gave him a very typical attacking, bombarding right back who will go in the spaces which is left by the winger and then put quality delivery in, which he always did. So in this role, when he was this bombarding right back, the job of Jordan Henderson was to cover the space, and at times for Matip, Liverpool used to play a high line. We all know that. So Wijnaldum used to join in, Robertson was wide on this side, Firmino used to drop deep and then attack from deep, getting ready for cutbacks. Henderson, whilst he used to join all these attacks, he was also tasked with the job of covering the space left by Trent. Of course, Matip was there. Of course, later on, Konate was there. Of course, Joe Gomez was there. Fabinho used to be here. He also used to just move on the right side at times to just cover that space. So for Trent to be brilliant in this version of Trent, there has to be someone who covers that space, because if Trent leaves, then all that space in behind is going to hurt the team that he plays for. And that means it will leave too much work to do for the right centre back, which is why someone like Henderson has to drop in and cover that space. So for Trent to be brilliant at this, Henderson has to do a very specific job, which Henderson was brilliant at. Now, this was how Trent was used by Klopp during that period that I mentioned. And now we move on to Trent's role under Arne Slot. Now, this is completely different. This is a bit similar to how he was used during the last season of Jurgen Klopp, but this is very different. So first of all, I was watching Lawrence McKenna's recent video, and he claimed that Trent, by the end of his Liverpool career last season, was not playing 100%. Like, he was not completely fit. He had some injury issues, but because he's so brilliant, he was playing through them and was still very effective. And Lawrence McKenna is someone I have been following for years, and I believe most of the things that he says. And he's someone who knows what is going on inside this club, which is why his informations are mostly very valuable. So now we see Trent under Slot. Now here is Trent, here is Robbo, now we have Konate, Gravenberch is there instead of Fabinho, Sobozla instead of Hendo, who is a very different profile, and McAllister instead of Wijnaldum, again, a very different profile. So the structure of the team, the build-up of the team, the emphasis of attacks in this team has completely changed. Now, Trent in this system was used in what they call in rugby, and now that word is also being used in football a lot, is quarterback. Now, quarterback is basically dictating the game from a deeper positions, playing brilliant passes, almost Andrea Pirlo-esque passes through the lines, through the gaps, over the top, but right into the player's path. We saw in the last game when Darwin Núñez in this position made a run like this from between the defenders, and Trent from a position like this just played an incomparable pass. Like, how many players in the world can actually complete that pass? When I think straight away, if someone comes to mind, it's Kevin De Bruyne. He's probably the only one who can actually complete that pass. And that was a brilliant pass from Trent. The vision and then the execution, both absolutely brilliant. Now, his role under Slot was a right-sided quarterback to create chances, to add a lot of value in the build-up, and to just be this quarterback that I'm talking about. Now, if you look at the role he was given, this was pretty much the area. Starting from here to here is where I think he was most effective. Now, at times, he did make these runs where he came in these positions when Salah was out wide, when Soboslai slightly took up slightly advanced positions, Gravenberch was doing his thing, Gakpo was in his position, Diaz, Jota, whoever was just roaming around the box, McAllister linking up the play, and Trent at times just came into this position where Salah actually played the layoff and Trent again delivered brilliant passes toward the far post. So Trent under Slot in his best performances was in this kind of an area here, pinging the ball to Gakpo, pinging it to Diaz, playing line breaking or progressive passes into a Gravenberch or mostly into Soboslai or mostly into Salah, who is at times waiting out wide, who at times is coming inside. But what we did not see on multiple occasions, or what we did not see as the majority part of the Trent role in the Slot system, was Salah dropping in and Trent making these runs and then crossing the ball. Because what I think it does is, whilst Trent's crosses from this position are brilliant, from this position, he has more options. So from this position, he can play a pass into McAllister. He can play that fizzed pass, drilled pass into Soboslai, who can then, in half spaces, turn and make something happen. Who can play brilliant pass if someone drops in like this. Who can play a brilliant diagonal into Gakpo. So from this position, Trent can play more range of passes and has more options. And it creates more angle, and thus it creates variety in Liverpool's build-up play. So these are the two best ways that Trent was used at Liverpool. First by Klopp as this bombarding right back, but second was under Slot, When the heavy metal football was out of the window, it was measured, it was the Dutch control. And in that, we saw Trent playing as a quarterback. In the blue area that I've highlighted, that is where Trent's best performances actually came. And I don't think I really have to explain the Frimpong way under Alonso, but just in a minute I will. And I will do it in the Real Madrid team. I don't have to create a whole Leverkusen team for that. The Leverkusen way is pretty simple. It's a back three, or you can call it a back five, whatever you want, in which Frimpong was here, and then it was a 3-5-2 at times, or it was a 3-4-3 at times. Whatever it was a very direct, typical wing back play. The sort of wing back play we saw Reece James and Ben Chilwell play under Thomas Tuchel. We saw Victor Moses and Marcos Alonso play under Antonio Conte. Coincidentally, both are Chelsea examples. But we saw a 3-5-2 where where Frimpong's role was to make run after run after run, up and down constantly, underlapping at times, but mostly staying out wide and overlapping, then coming inside with inverting runs and then playing crosses, taking shots. He became a brilliant goal scoring options occasionally and was very effective because of his raw pace, the very, very raw pace that he possesses. So this was the Frimpong way, which Frimpong played at Leverkusen very recently for a few seasons under Xabi Alonso. Now, I want to come back to the next point, which is what is the best role and approach to consistently get the best out of Trent? Now, this role that I've decided is, of course, based on my analysis. I have taken all the context into consideration that was available to me, and then I have came up with a tactic, you can say, or an approach that actually allows Real Madrid and Xabi Alonso to get the best out of Trent. Now, how should I put it? Trent was brilliant under Klopp, and his numbers probably were better than any fullback in the history of sport under Klopp. And that raw pace, that raw power, the way he used to play in that era I mentioned was brilliant. But there was something about his role under Arne Slot which made me feel that if Trent plays in that role, his career is prolonged. And one more thing that it does is, if Trent, let's say at Real Madrid, is playing this role of this bombarding fullback, which I think is not possible because Rodrigo is not inverting because he's right-footed, so you need Brahim Diaz, but that's topic for another day. Whatever happens, if Trent has to play like this, the bombarding, almost the wing-back Trent, then Valverde or Tchouaméni, someone has to do the Henderson role, which takes away from the attack. Then one of the midfielder has to draw back because then again you cannot leave a 2v1 or a 3v1 to deal with a Rudiger or Militao or Hoyson, whoever plays there. So for Trent to be excellent, as I said previously, in this bombarding role, someone has to give up their game. Now Henderson was special in sense to execute that role. I don't think Valverde is. And even if Valverde is brilliant, which he is, I think you're taking away from his game if you're asking him to just sit. And it goes the same for Tchouaméni also on some levels, despite the fact that he's a defensive midfielder. And also for Trent to be this, when he's now starting to pick up some injury issues, it's very heavy physically. It's hectic. It's physically draining for him to play in that role. I think when Trent plays like this, his defending also improves because I've said this many times. Trent's weakness is defending, and I agree. But what kind of defending? Is his 1v1 defending really bad? I don't think so. Yeah, of course he has made mistakes, but his 1v1 defending is pretty good now that he has had all that experience of so many years. His problem is, or the structure problem is, when he bombards forward, when he almost becomes a right winger, and then someone has to drop in, and if they don't, or even if they do, there is this huge space left. And when someone from that gap makes that run and gets the ball to a winger, then you see the problem. And that is not necessarily a Trent problem. That is a structure problem. And that's where Xabi Alonso's tactics come in. So you need to understand that how Trent does at Real Madrid also heavily relies on what Alonso wants to do with this Real Madrid team. Now, Trent playing in that bombarding role would require someone to sacrifice their game, which I don't think makes sense, especially when Trent also might not want to do this. after the slight injury issues that he's having. Trent in this role, his career will be prolonged. His passing range will be used more. Real Madrid's build-up will be affected or impacted in a different way. He will bring some angles to the build-up that Real Madrid haven't had before, because Carvajal cannot play drilled passes into Jude in these positions. Carvajal cannot play a long-ranging, perfect diagonal into Mbappe drifting in from the left, or Vinicius making the same move. Carvajal is great, but he cannot surely make that same pass that Trent can, and the set piece quality that Trent is going to bring. So if you want Trent, you want him to use in the role that I have used multiple times in this video, is the quarterback role. You want to give him the ball and let him decide if it should go to Rodrigo on the wide side, if it should go to Valverde in between the lines, if it should be played in that Darwin Núñez typical pass to Mbappe making the run in behind, if it should go over the top for Vinicius on that side, or it should be drilled into Jude, or it should be a curled cross to Jude, whatever it is. Look at the amount of options that Real Madrid have if Trent is used more in the way that Slot used him in the season that we just saw Liverpool become the champions. But if you use him as this bombarding fullback, he might be good, but then Valverde or someone has to sacrifice their game, which is not ideal, is it? And then you're only having him in a position where he can cross the ball or cut it back. And then you are also having all these space left in behind. So the best way to use Trent, in my opinion, is clearly the slot way. Have him in this position. Let Rodrigo be out wide. Let Mbappe make his runs in behind. Let Jude pick up good positions. Let at times Brahim Diaz pick good positions all Valverde. Let Tchouaméni be in here. Let Vinicius make these runs. And if Trent stays in that position, plays almost like a quarterback, and again enters when the attack is happening, enters in this, instead of making this run, he makes this run and he picks up the ball here. Imagine the variety of passes that he can play. He can play a pass into Rodrigo. He can play a pass into Mbappe. He can take a shot if he arrives in the zone 14 at the right time, because strike of the ball, you talk about striking the ball, Trent is an absolute expert at that particular skill. And then he can play passes into Vinicius. He can dictate the game from that position. He can do multiple brilliant things from that position if you allow him to play as a quarterback. And that also allows then Mendy slight freedom to go forward. Because if Trent goes like bombarding fullback, Mendy cannot do the same thing. Mendy has to stay. But if Trent is playing this quarterback role where he enters here, stays in this position, holds on, and dictates the game, Mendy can also push on, which allows Vinicius to go inside. And then you have another pass, a diagonal, into Mendy. So I think this is the best way for Alonso to use him. Because I think it's very easy for fans out there. And I'm not a big Trent fan. I'm a Trent fan, but I'm not a Trent lover, or I'm not someone who is biased towards Trent. So what I think might happen is if he plays against a good winger and, Alonso just gives him this role where you just say, Trent, you gotta make this run after run, run after run, and put cross after cross, cross after cross after cross. It doesn't make sense because, again, they don't have an archetype striker. But if Alonso asks him to do this, and if this space is left behind and they concede goals from that side, I think Liverpool fans and everyone, look, Trent's mistake, Trent's mistake, Trent's mistake, Trent cannot defend. And it's not true, is it? Because even if he cannot defend, he's brilliant in that position. It's down to Xabi Alonso to actually pick up the role or provide him with the right environment and then give him the right responsibilities and put him in the right positions with the right players around him, that he's not exposed. He's fine with 1v1 defending. What he is not fine with is being here and then someone having all this space to attack into. Who is fine with that? Alphonso Davies and Kyle Walker, that's it. Not everyone has the recovery pace of an Alphonso Davies or a Kyle Walker. So Trent as a quarterback, I think, is the best quarterback that we will see in football for a long, long time. And Alonso has to realize that and has to get the right players around him and then use him in the way that Slot used him very recently. And now, pretty much the last question. Will Trent succeed or fail at Real Madrid? Now, this might offend some people, but I think at certain clubs, it's impossible to fail. Real Madrid, maybe, very likely, is one of them. You're playing two or maximum three good teams in the whole season. Rafinha and Nico Williams are probably the only two players, while running at him is when Trent could be worrying some of the Real Madrid fans. Again, I had this conversation with one of my friends and I said, for Trent to have a good game against only two good wingers almost in the entire league, Alonso has to get it right. Alonso has to give him the role that I just mentioned. And then Alonso has to get Chouameni and Valverde on that side, which allows him some cover potentially with Militao, Rudiger behind him. I think Trent will be all right. If you ask him to do this and you give Rafinha and Nico Williams all that space, and then if you blame Trent, I think you just don't understand the bigger picture of football. That not every time the exact individual in that position is responsible for that. Sometimes the coach has just given him the wrong instructions. And I think to say that he'll fail, I think it's very hard to fail. Will he succeed? That depends on your definition of success. What I think is he's the kind of player Real Madrid were missing. So Real Madrid had Mbappe, pace in behind, Vinicius, pace in behind, Rodrigo, pace in behind. And then they had midfielders who are great at attacking the box, work rate, box to box, effective, robust midfielders, Jude Bellingham, Valverde. What they did not have, and I think missed massively last season, is someone who can pass the ball, can dictate the game. They missed a Toni Kroos. They missed a Modric because he was old. They needed someone who can dictate the game. They needed someone who can control the tempo of the game. They needed someone who can actually find these players who are great at making runs. So having players who are brilliant at making runs is one thing, but then also having players who have the ability to find those runs with vision and execution is another thing. And I think that's what Trent will add. Now, will Trent succeed or fail is, again, I'm saying, is highly down to how Alonso uses him in context to the whole system at Real Madrid, which we will only know once the season begins, which is quite a far away. But we can also have a glimpse at it in the Club World Cup, which is not that far away anyway. So let me know your thoughts. You're more than welcome to join me in a video or just send me your thoughts based on everything that I've said, or if you have some other way in which you think Alonso can approach the tactics and the structure around Trent, which can then impact Madrid in a good way. And whether you think he'll be a success or a failure, but with context. Don't just say, oh, he'll be a failure. Come on, you're better than that. Let's be mature and let's do analysis with context and bigger picture, not just say controversial stuff for getting clicks. That's not my game. And we'll see you soon. Hopefully, I upload a video again, and we'll see you soon.